New Deep Dive.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're jumping into really one of the most anticipated conversations, I think, in a while. The discussion between Dr. Richard Dawkins and Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, with Alex O'Connor moderating.
Yeah, it was definitely one people were waiting for.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what really stood out for me anyway, and it kind of defines a lot of their work, is this core tension.
What?
The interplay between what we think of as fact versus what we understand as like myth or symbol.
Exactly. And that's our mission today, really, to kind of pull out the most important nuggets, the key insights from what they talked about. We're looking for the surprising links, maybe even unexpected bits where they actually agree as we sort of navigate this whole intellectual landscape.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Right off the bat, the conversation hits this fundamental difference in how they see truth. Dawkins kicks things off saying he's a cultural Christian,
Right.
but then immediately says he means like virtually nothing by it. He tells Peterson, pretty bluntly, that he's drunk on symbols,
Yeah, that was direct.
super direct, and that he, Dawkins, only cares about truth value. He just sees no factual truth in claims like the virgin birth or the resurrection. Flat out.
And Peterson, well, he comes at it from a totally different place, doesn't he? He argues back that, any culture that doesn't hold the image of the woman and infant sacred dies.
Mhm.
For him, these texts, they aren't just old stories. They reflect something deeper, what he calls logos, this sort of underlying order or principle in reality, in consciousness.
Like a divine order.
Pretty much, yeah. He says truth is unified, that the world of value and the world of fact coincide, and he explicitly equates that with divine order.
Mhm.
So yeah, for him, value and fact aren't separate things, they're tangled up together.
Which is a pretty radical idea if you're coming from, say, Dawkins' empirical science background.
Okay.
So how does this actually play out when they look at, like, a specific story?
Right, exactly. This difference really comes into sharp focus when they get onto the story of Cain from the Bible. Dawkins, being the literalist he is, he calls out Peterson's intense focus on Cain.
He noticed how many times Peterson mentioned him.
Yeah, he literally counted, said something like 356 references to Cain in the book, and basically called it Peterson's obsession. Like, why spend so much time on this character? For Dawkins, it's just, a story.
Okay, so why does Peterson focus so much on Cain? What's the deal there?
Well, Peterson explains it with his idea of the hyperreal. It's kind of like a pattern or an idea that becomes, in a way, more real than physical reality because it's so deeply embedded in how we experience the world together.
More real than real.
Sort of. He says the pattern that Cain represents is an eternal pattern. It's like a higher level of existence. He compares it to how Raskolnikov, the character from Crime and Punishment, was like everywhere in Russia when Dostoevsky wrote it.
Ah, okay. Like an archetype embodying something real in the culture.
Exactly. Peterson's arguing these biblical stories speak poetically and metaphorically and allegorically. He thinks the story evolved to be maximally memorable, shaped to match the contours of the human memory.
And Dawkins' reaction.
Simple. I am a literalist. And he questions why we should even think the authors of Genesis were great writers. Just flatly rejects the premise.
Wow. Okay, they really are on different planets sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So, for you listening, how do you personally distinguish truth when it's presented through these very different lenses? But here's where it gets really interesting. This attempt, surprisingly, to bridge two pretty big concepts.
Yeah.
The meme and the archetype.
Yeah, this was a key moment. So Dawkins, who actually coined the term meme, defines it as like a virus of the mind, right? Something that spreads through imitation.
Like his example of the backwards baseball hat.
Exactly. Simple imitation. And crucially, for Dawkins, memes are not embedded into the psychology of people. They're superficial, learned, not innate.
Okay. And then the archetype.
Yeah.
How does Dawkins see that?
He describes an archetype as something which all humans have as a virtue of being human. It's built in. And because it's built in, he says, it's not something that spreads as an epidemic. It's just there universally.
So, two very different things. One spreads, one's just inherent.
Right. But Peterson offers this more nuanced view that actually connects them. He apparently initially saw them as almost identical, but then refined it. He suggests something spreads, like a meme, because it has emotional resonance.
So it resonates with something deeper.
Precisely. Peterson suggests the archetype is a more fundamental psychological concept that memes can then play upon. Basically, memes catch on because they tap into these deeper archetypal structures.
And this is the kicker. Dawkins actually goes along with this to a degree.
He does. He says, if chiming in with an archetype is a reason why they might spread, then I could go with that.
That's huge. A real point of agreement there.
It really is. And Peterson then builds on this, describing this kind of hierarchical relationship. Archetypes are the deep stuff, foundational and deep, that wouldn't change any faster in a sense than the species itself changes.
Like the bedrock.
Exactly. While memes are more like the efflorescences of that idea, things that bubble up but are less permanent, he even suggests that no idea is so trivial that it doesn't touch the depths, because if it didn't, no one would care about it.
That makes intuitive sense.
Yeah, and he points out that religious ideas are often very catching precisely because they tap into this archetypal core. He mentions Mircea Eliad's work on religious ideas here, too.
But Dawkins still has his reservations, right? Like with the battle of the gods.
Right. He pushes back on that being some universal archetype. He finds it not that convincing, basically saying it's just an obvious thing that comes from humans having battles. It's not necessarily some profound, innate pattern for him.
So, again, that difference in interpretation, it makes you think, doesn't it? Consider the ideas that have really grabbed you. Do they seem to tap into something deeper, something foundational like Peterson suggests? Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about sacrifice. This is absolutely central to Peterson's whole philosophy, this idea that the foundation of community is sacrifice.
Yeah. He puts it quite profoundly. He says, perception itself is sacrificial in its nature, which is a whole thing in itself, but also that there's no difference between work and sacrifice.
Wow, okay.
His point is that to be part of a community, any community, you have to sacrifice something that's local to what you want here and now. You give up immediate gratification for something bigger, something shared.
I can see that. But you can also imagine Dawkins hearing the word sacrifice, especially in a religious context.
Oh, absolutely. He calls it an unpleasant idea, particularly thinking about biblical stories like Abraham and Isaac or Jesus on the cross. That kind of sacrifice is definitely not appealing from his perspective.
But Peterson connects it to something more. Psychological.
Right.
Biological.
He does. He argues that the ability to forego gratification, which is linked to cortical maturation, basically, the development of the thinking part of your brain is actually a great predictor of future success.
Like a marshmallow test.
Kind of, yeah. It lines up with what psychologists call trait conscientiousness, which he says is the best predictor that isn't cognitive of long-term future success. So this capacity to delay gratification, to sacrifice the now for the future, is fundamental to success in his view.
And they brought up that anthropological example, the potlatch.
Right. The potlatch. It's this practice where people would engage in the destruction of one's own property as a mark of prestige. It sounds crazy, right?
Yeah, why destroy valuable stuff?
Well, Peterson interprets it as demonstrating a willingness to distribute generously, but also, crucially, as showing faith in the process by which that wealth was generated. Like, I can afford to destroy this because I know how to create more.
Ah, okay. A display of competence.
Exactly. And he ties it into sexual selection, too, observing that often women use wealth as a marker of sexual attractiveness, not because they're interested in wealth itself, but because wealth is the best single predictor of the ability to generate wealth. It's about signaling that underlying competence, that ability to provide and succeed.
That's a really interesting way to frame it. Does thinking about it like that change how you view giving things up? Not just as losing something, but maybe as an investment in something deeper, like competence or community. Okay, now we get to probably one of the thorniest parts of the whole conversation, the nature of biblical truth itself. Peterson makes this claim that's pretty controversial.
Which one? He made a few.
True. This one. That it doesn't make a difference whether it was divinely inspired or whether it evolved within humanity.
Ah, right. That one definitely raised eyebrows.
Yeah. For him, remember, truth is unified. The world of value and the world of fact coincide, and that unity is essentially what's being described as divine order. So divine or evolved. Same functional truth for navigating life, in his view.
And Dawkins' reaction was predictably explosive.
Pretty much. He says it's a huge difference. It's not the same thing.
Yeah.
He's totally willing to entertain the idea of an evolving manuscript, a text written and changed by humans over time.
Okay, sure.
But divine inspiration, absolutely not. For Dawkins, those are two completely different claims needing totally different kinds of evidence, worlds apart.
And Alex O'Connor, the moderator, he summed it up really well, didn't he?
He did. He observed that Peterson maybe drags the mundane up into the realm of divinity, whereas for Dawkins, Peterson's approach drags the divine down to the realm of the mundane.
That's a great summary, and Peterson's response to that.
It was interesting. He said something like, I don't know why it would drag the divine down if we're speaking of something like the straight, narrow path of harmony between multiple modes of being.
Okay, unpack that a little.
It sounds like he's saying that finding this harmony, integrating the factual and the symbolic, isn't lowering the divine. It's actually discovering a deeper, more useful truth that helps you live properly.
And he uses the bronze serpent story to illustrate this, right?
Exactly. That story from Exodus where the Israelites get bitten by snakes and they're cured by looking at a bronze serpent. Moses puts on a pole. Peterson connects this to modern psychological exposure therapy, facing your fears.
Okay.
And then he links Christ identifying with this serpent to confronting the worst possible suffering, the ultimate confrontation with malevolence in the Passion story. He argues this whole process represents an evolution towards sacrificial logos where we let our ideas die instead of us.
It's a complex, layered interpretation. And Dawkins,
His response, it doesn't impress me.
classic Dawkins, just cuts through the layers.
Right. And that difference in what impresses them leads Dawkins back to his direct, factual challenges. He pushes hard on the virgin birth. Did Jesus have a father? That's a factual question. He wants a yes or no.
And Peterson's answer, does he give one?
He kind of sidesteps the literal question. He admits there are elements of the text that I don't know how to fully account for, but he stresses he understands it from a metaphorical perspective and from a mythic perspective.
He focuses on its impact.
Yeah, he points to its power, how it could bring Rome to its knees. For Peterson, Dawkins asking for the literal fact is sort of beside the issue. If you want to understand the story's deeper truth, its power to shape cultures towards, as he puts it, life abundant, or like Cain, towards devastation.
So again, fundamentally different ideas about what constitutes the truth of a story.
Exactly. So what about for you? What kind of truth holds the most weight? Is it the purely factual, the metaphorical, or maybe somewhere in between? Okay, let's move to another really gripping part of their talk, which again shows disagreement, but also, surprisingly, some connection. It's about dragons.
Dragons.
Yeah.
Right. This ties back to the archetype discussion, doesn't it?
It does. And Dawkins, predictably, starts off by dismissing them. I'm not interested in dragons. I'm interested in reality. He prefers to talk about biology, the arms race between predators and prey.
Concrete science over mythical creatures. Makes sense for him.
But Peterson pushes back. He presents the dragon as the imagistic equivalent of predator. It's like an abstracted concept of danger, of predation itself. A deep meme, he calls it.
So not a literal creature, but a symbol representing a real universal threat.
Exactly. He argues we had the image way before we had the word. The picture of the terrifying thing came first.
And Peterson thinks this dragon symbol is uniquely human somehow.
Kind of. He argues the human story, unlike other animals, involves finding a treasure somewhere through conflict with these predators or dragons. It requires the courage to voluntarily confront the danger or the unknown.
So confronting the dragon leads to growth, finding the treasure.
Yes. And he says this confrontation is identical with the mechanism of learning. Facing challenges is how we learn and grow.
Okay, I see the link to his broader ideas, and they had that phrase, lion as genetic, dragon as mimetic.
Yeah, that was memorable. Dawkins acknowledges the dragon is an effective mimetic abstraction, a useful symbol that spreads through culture, but he still finds it not that impressive compared to actual biology.
Still holding his ground on the science being more fundamental. But then the Baldwin effect comes up. This was a real moment of convergence, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Explain the Baldwin effect again quickly.
So Dawkins defines it as the genetic assimilation of a cultural or learned idea. Basically, a behavior starts off as learned, maybe spreads through imitation mimetically, like tool use in chimps or birds opening milk bottles.
Right.
And if that behavior gives an advantage, then individuals genetically predisposed to learn it faster or better will be favored by natural selection. Over time, the behavior can become more innate, more genetically hardwired.
So culture influences genetics over long timescales.
Exactly. And Peterson immediately jumps on this, saying, this is essentially the same pattern of archetype evolution that's implicit in the Jungian theoretic.
He's linking it to Carl Jung's idea of inherited psychological patterns, the collective unconscious.
Precisely. He's suggesting the Baldwin effect could be the biological mechanism for how these deep universal archetypes Jung talked about might actually become part of our inherited makeup.
And Dawkins' reaction to that.
This is the amazing part. He says, that's a fascinating idea, that Jungian archetypes could be genetically assimilated via the Baldwin effect. He even muses that something as fundamental as human bipedalism might be an example.
Wow. So a learned way of moving, becoming genetically fixed.
That's the suggestion. It's a huge potential bridge between their worldviews.
Absolutely mind-blowing, really. The idea that our deepest stories, our myths, might actually be connected to our biology through evolution. And Peterson even throws in sexual selection.
Right. He suggests that men who embody the hero meme, he lists figures like vampires, werewolves, pirates, surgeons, and billionaires, basically figures who can stand up to predators and confront danger, might be much more likely to reproduce.
So our attraction to these hero types could actually speed up the process of embedding these archetypal patterns genetically via the Baldwin effect.
That's his hypothesis. It implies our mate choices could be actively shaping the genetic assimilation of these deep narrative structures.
That's a profound thought to come out of this deep dive, this potential link between story biology and evolution. So we started this journey looking at two really brilliant but very different minds, one laser focused on fact, the other on the power of symbol and story, both wrestling with these huge questions about truth, sacrifice, what it means to be human.
Yeah, they started poles apart on many things, and yet, amazingly, through concepts like memes and archetypes, and especially the Baldwin effect, they actually found some common ground. They converged on this incredible possibility.
That our deepest patterns, the dragons and heroes in our collective stories, might not just be cultural fluff. They could actually be physically wired into us through evolution, maybe even shaped by who we choose as partners.
It's a staggering thought.
It really is. So the final question for you to think about is, what does it mean for you personally if the stories that guide us, the values we cherish, and even the way our minds are structured aren't separate things, but are all deeply tangled up? Echoes of our shared biological and cultural past.
Something to chew on, definitely.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Subscribe to New Deep Dive